the creeping shadows. All right, sit tight, because I've got a tale that'll send shivers down your spine. It all started on a sweltering summer day, the kind where even the air seemed to buzz with heat. Now, I've never been one to shy away from a good scare, but there's one thing that gets my heart racing faster than a roller coaster ride: bugs. Yep, you heard me right. Insects, critters, creepy crawlies. They're the stuff of my nightmares. So there I was, stuck in my family's old cabin in the woods. You know the type, rustic, creaky, and practically inviting every bug within a mile radius to join the party. My family thought it would be hilarious to confront my fear head-on, as if my aversion to insects was just some silly quirk. My younger brother Mike was the ringleader of this little escapade. He had this mischievous glint in his eye as he handed me a jar, practically bursting with buzzing winged monstrosities. "Face your fear, bro," he taunted, grinning like a maniac. I could feel sweat trickling down my spine as I stared at those fluttering wings, my stomach doing somersaults. But I couldn't let them see me sweat. No sir. With a forced chuckle, I mustered up every ounce of courage I had and slowly lifted the lid. As soon as the lid came off, the insects took flight, swirling around me in a chaotic frenzy. Panic surged through my veins, but I held my ground, determined not to give them the satisfaction. It was a standoff between me and the bugs, and I was determined to come out on top. Just when I thought I had it under control, Mike dropped the bombshell. "Look behind you," he whispered, a wicked glint in his eye. I turned slowly, dreading what I might find. There, on the cabin wall, was a massive, furry, 8-legged nightmare. It seemed to leer at me, its eyes glinting malevolently in the dim light. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Spiders were my ultimate nightmare, and this one was straight out of a horror movie. My mind raced, searching for an escape route, but my body refused to budge. Mike and the others burst into laughter, reveling in my terror. They had orchestrated this whole nightmare, knowing full well the phobia I harbored. It was a cruel prank, and I was the unwitting victim. After what felt like an eternity, Mike finally put an end to the charade. He gently ushered the spider out of the cabin, its many legs skittering away, leaving me trembling in its wake. As the adrenaline began to ebb, I couldn't help but feel a seething anger rising within me. My own family had subjected me to this torment, exploiting my fear for their own amusement. It was a betrayal that cut deep. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of bugs crawling all over me. Every rustle of leaves outside seemed like a swarm of insects ready to pounce. My imagination ran wild, painting vivid, horrifying scenarios in the dark corners of my mind. But the worst was yet to come. As I tossed and turned, I noticed a shadowy figure standing at the foot of my bed. My heart pounded, my breath catching in my throat. I tried to call out, but no words came. It was as if the air had been sucked from the room. The figure moved closer, its features becoming clearer. It was me, but distorted, contorted into a grotesque, insect-like form. My skin was covered in chitin, my limbs twisted and segmented. It was a horrifying reflection of my deepest fears. I wanted to scream to escape from this living nightmare, but my body was paralyzed, held captive by the terror that gripped me. The figure drew nearer, its eyes locked onto mine, filled with a malevolence that sent shivers down my spine. Just as I thought I couldn't bear it any longer, the figure began to dissolve, like smoke in the wind. It faded into the darkness, leaving me gasping for breath, drenched in a cold sweat. Morning light filtered through the cabin windows, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. I sat up, my heart still racing, my mind reeling from the horrors I had witnessed. It was a nightmarish twist that I couldn't shake, a manifestation of my deepest fears. As I left the cabin, I couldn't look at my family the same way. They had taken my phobia, my greatest weakness, and turned it into a waking nightmare. It was a betrayal that cut deep, leaving scars that would linger long after the summer had ended. So here I am, sharing this tale with you, a cautionary reminder that fear can be a powerful weapon. It can twist reality, turning even the most familiar surroundings into a nightmare. And sometimes, the true horrors are the ones that lurk within our own minds, waiting to be unleashed. The crushing dread. Ever woken up in a place so strange, so utterly confined, that it feels like the walls are closing in on you? Well, let me tell you about one unforgettable night that shook me to my core. It all began with a seemingly innocent dream, but it soon turned into a nightmarish ordeal that I'll never forget. I found myself in a room, but it wasn't like any room I'd ever been in before. The walls were bare, painted a dull grey, and there was no furniture, no doors, no windows, just an empty, featureless space. Panic gnawed at me as I scanned the room, my heart racing. My breath quickened as I realized there was no way out. I pressed my hands against the walls, searching for a hidden exit, but they were solid and unyielding. The room seemed to close in on me, with every passing moment, the walls inching closer and closer. I could feel the suffocating fear of claustrophobia setting in. The room was relentless, squeezing the air from my lungs, my own mind turning against me. It was as if the walls were alive, maliciously taunting me with their relentless advance. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest, a cold sweat breaking out on my brow. I knew that if I didn't find a way out soon, the room would become my tomb. My thoughts raced, and I desperately wished for an escape. As the walls continued to close in, I felt a wave of dread wash over me. This was my worst nightmare, my deepest phobia, manifested before my very eyes. I had always been terrified of confined spaces, the feeling of being trapped, and now I was living that terror. But then, just as I thought I was about to be crushed, a flicker of realization washed over me. This was a dream, an incredibly vivid and nightmarish dream, but a dream nonetheless. I closed my eyes and focused all my willpower on waking up, on escaping this inescapable nightmare. With a jolt, I snapped awake, gasping for breath, my body drenched in sweat. I was back in my own bed, my room bathed in the gentle light of dawn. The walls were not closing in, and the suffocating dread of the dream began to ebb. Relief washed over me, but my heart still raced, and I couldn't shake the lingering unease that the dream had left behind. I knew it was just a product of my own fears, a manifestation of my phobia, but it had felt so real, so visceral. As I lay there, trying to calm my racing heart, I couldn't help but wonder what had triggered such a vivid nightmare. I had never experienced a dream so intense, so chilling. It was as if my own mind had conspired to terrify me. The day that followed was filled with a sense of unease, a feeling that the nightmare was still lurking just beneath the surface. I went about my routine, trying to shake off the lingering fear, but it clung to me like a shadow. Night fell once more, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread as I climbed into bed. I didn't want to relive the nightmare, to face my phobia in such a terrifying way, but as I closed my eyes, I felt the dream world pulling me back in. I found myself once again in that featureless room, the walls closing in on me with a relentless determination. The panic set in, and I knew I had to escape, but how? The dream seemed so real, so unforgiving. As the walls pressed closer, my heart pounded in my chest, and the weight of my phobia bore down on me. But then, a flicker of memory from the previous night's dream emerged, a realization that this was all in my mind. I closed my eyes and focused on the absurdity of the situation. I knew that dreams could be irrational, that they often played tricks on our fears. With every ounce of willpower I could muster, I pushed back against the dream, willing myself to wake up. Once again, I snapped awake in my own bed, gasping for breath, my body drenched in sweat. The room was unchanged, the walls not closing in. The nightmare had released its grip on me, and I was free. But the dread remained, a lingering feeling that my own mind had betrayed me. It was as if my phobia had been weaponized against me, turning the very essence of my being into a nightmare. I couldn't escape the feeling that something beyond my understanding was at play. And so, as I share this tale with you, I can't help but wonder about the mysteries of the mind, the power of our deepest fears, and the way our own thoughts can be both our greatest enemy and our salvation. The crushing dread of phobia can be a terrifying ordeal, one that lingers long after we wake from the nightmare. The Chamber of Phobias. Let me take you to a place where the darkness of the mind becomes a labyrinth of terror, a tale that begins with a seemingly innocuous curiosity, but soon spirals into a nightmare of unrelenting fear. It was a night I'll never forget, one that began with an insatiable desire for knowledge, but ended in a waking nightmare. I had always been a curious soul, eager to explore the hidden corners of the world. So when I stumbled upon an ancient manuscript that spoke of a chamber in the heart of an abandoned mansion, I couldn't resist the urge to investigate. The text hinted at the chamber being a place where one could confront their deepest fears, a challenge I was determined to undertake. As I made my way to the dilapidated mansion, I couldn't help but feel a mounting sense of trepidation. The air was heavy with a foreboding stillness, and the old walls of the mansion seemed to whisper secrets to anyone willing to listen. I had always been afraid of the unknown, and the mansion was the epitome of it. The chamber was said to contain objects, each representing a different phobia. The first object I came across was a cage filled with hissing snakes. I had never been particularly fond of these creatures, and the sight of them coiled and ready to strike sent a shiver down my spine. My heart raced, but I knew I couldn't let fear rule me. I reached out, gingerly touching the cage, forcing myself to confront the fear head-on. As I moved deeper into the chamber, I encountered other objects, a towering stack of crumbling books representing the fear of knowledge, a mirror reflecting my own image twisted into grotesque forms, symbolizing the fear of self, and a dark abyss that seemed to go on forever, embodying the fear of the unknown. Each object confronted me with a different phobia, each one challenging my courage. The further I delved into the chamber, the more intense my fear became. The objects seemed to feed off my anxiety, amplifying my dread with each passing moment. It was as if the room was a living, breathing entity, designed to terrify and break the spirit of anyone who dared to enter. As the chamber played on my deepest fears, I couldn't help but question my decision to confront them. The manuscript had mentioned that this ordeal was a path to self-discovery, a way to face and overcome my phobias. But the more I struggled, the more I felt like I was losing control. I reached a breaking point when I encountered a simple, unassuming box. The manuscript had described it as the fear of the unknown, and as I approached, I couldn't help but feel a gnawing dread in the pit of my stomach. I didn't know what might be inside, what might be lurking in the darkness. With trembling hands, I opened the box, and as I peered inside, my heart seemed to stop. It was empty, save for a single whispered question that echoed through the chamber. What do you fear the most? The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of all my fears, and I realized that this was the heart of the chamber's test. It wasn't about confronting individual phobias, but about confronting the fear of fear itself. It was about acknowledging that fear was a part of life, an integral and unavoidable emotion. In that moment, I felt a profound shift within myself. The grip of my phobias began to loosen, and I understood that fear, in all its forms, was a natural part of the human experience. It was something to be understood and embraced, not something to be defeated. As I left the chamber, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace and acceptance. I had come face to face with my deepest fears, and in doing so, I had conquered them in a way I had never thought possible. The mansion that had seemed so foreboding on my arrival now appeared welcoming, as if it had witnessed my transformation. But here's where the story takes a twist. Just as I thought my journey was over, I turned back to the chamber and discovered that there was no way out. The door had vanished, leaving me trapped in the very room that had once been my nightmare. Panic set in, and I scoured every corner of the chamber, searching for an exit. It seemed that the room itself had become my greatest phobia, a fear of confinement, of being trapped with no way out. I screamed for help, but my voice seemed to vanish into the depths of the chamber. The walls began to close in on me, echoing my greatest fear. The room itself had become my final, insurmountable phobia. As I write this, I am still trapped in that room, the walls inching closer with each passing moment. I have come to realize that the chamber was a test, not of my phobias, but of my ability to face them and emerge transformed. And as I confront my ultimate fear, the fear of confinement, I can't help but wonder if there is a lesson to be learned here, a deeper understanding of fear that still eludes me. So here I am, sharing this harrowing tale with you, a cautionary reminder that fear can be a powerful force both within and outside of us. It can drive us to confront our deepest phobias, but it can also become our greatest adversary. Sometimes, it's not the phobias themselves that we should fear, but our reaction to them, and the way they can shape our perception of reality.